Amaka's laugh split the market beneath the town hall like a bright, cruel bell. People paused mid-step. The hum of trade shrank to a thin, uneasy sound. The beggar shuffled among the stalls, coat patched, cap in hand, feet that whispered over cobbles. He asked no one for much, only a warm crust or a kind word. Amaka, satin catching the light, walked close and spat into his face. The crowd's air tightened. A basket fell, a mother clutched a child. The beggar bowed his head and moved away as if the world itself had given him back a small, bitter burden to carry. Chioma stood by a stall with jam still on her fingers and pressed the bread crust harder against her palm. Shame rose behind her ribs like heat. She had seen cruelty before, but never so public, never so bright. Voices slipped across the square, some quiet approval, some embarrassed coughs. The town hall looked down like a stern face. Chioma watched the beggar's slow retreat and felt something bend inside her. A small, soft ache for how easily people shut their hands to others. A stranger came that evening and took the inn's best room. He left a purse of cash heavy enough to hush gossip about his means. The innkeeper fussed and polished cups, telling servants to be ready for a guest of importance. People hummed in the street, perhaps a merchant, perhaps a buyer with cash to spend. The newcomer did not move with the swagger of someone used to shouting prices. He walked like a man who knew the weight of words and how to hold them. He ordered hot stew, linen napkins, and wine on ice jar. He set a small stack of notes on the table like a quiet claim. The village's whispers braided into a strange, hopeful thread. Maybe roads would be mended, maybe traders would come again. Others felt unease, a prickling caution. Chioma watched the stranger from a safe shadow, thinking of the gardener who had taught her to fold soil for seeds and to speak softly to seedlings. Something in the stranger's poise, the way he rested a hand on a chair, the soft tilt of his head when he listened, stirred a memory that was almost familiar. Outside, where the lowlands ran, an older woman murmured a name into the dark, Obina. The stranger's eyes lifted and for a moment met the window where Chioma stood. The glance trembled like a question and she pressed her forehead to the cool glass. Months earlier Ifani had been the quiet heart of easy things. He taught children where seeds hid in soil and how patience coaxed green from hard brown. He walked with a slow, gentle steadiness and sang soft songs when rains came. The village admired him for his craft and his willingness to share bread and knowledge. Then rumors arrived, thin as frost. A ledger had vanished, a donation meant for the village school could not be found, and a small sealed bundle had been left at Amaka's door. The whisper spread like ash on wind. Men crossed streets to avoid Ifani's gaze. Ikechukwu, his apprentice, stopped smiling the way boys stop when they have allowed adult worry into their mouths. Ifani's small room by the low ponds emptied and people who used to call him friend walked with their heads down. Chioma remembered watching him leave at dawn, a small bundle over his shoulder, his face set as if stone had settled into it.
Wait!
Ikechukwu was seen later that night clutching a sealed letter and slipping away. No one else seemed to ask why such a man like Ifani would be blamed. The village tilted. The space Ifani had filled with soft work and songs was a hole that hummed. Chioma felt that missing like a hollow in a bone. On a private night walk to the reed edge, when moonlight lay thin and the low wind made the grass whisper, Ifani met a presence older than his grief. She offered him help in a voice like slow rain, a quiet agreement that would bring him what he needed to be heard again. The bargain was solemn and secret. Only he and she would ever know how cash had come into his hands. He agreed because he loved the children who had trusted him, because the ledger hole had become a stone in his chest and because he believed in mending. From that night he transformed to a wealthy man and carried enough cash to buy what he could not before: time, access, and the leverage to call forth accounts and witnesses. Yet he kept the pack's true origin to himself. To everyone else he was simply a man who had returned with resources and a steady purpose. He however still disguised and came to the village as a burgher to see if the people had changed, only to be spat at by Amaka. When Obina returned, dressed modestly but with silver thread on his belt and new shoes, he bought the Obi's neglected lease with a tidy exchange that stunned tongues into silence. The Obi's rusted gate, the rooms that had sagged with time, shifted when news of the purchase spread. Amaka's pride prickled as if someone had reached a bruise long kept hidden. He sent an invitation to dinner that read like an assertion wrapped in velvet. Amaka could not refuse, she refused any show of weakness. At the dinner, Obina spoke in careful sentences that made sense to people and used to hearing gentleness framed with resolve. He named the old gardener who had tended the roses when the Obi had been younger, a name only a few remembered. At that sound Amaka's composure slipped. Ikechukwu watched from the crowd, jaw like a clasped hand, jealousy braided with worry in his eyes. People who had once bowed to Amaka now leaned closer to hear Obina's low stories. Chioma, standing near potted rosemary, felt the manor's foundation shift by an inch. Obina walked the frost-stiff garden and paused at a lone white rose that bloomed despite the cold. He touched its petal like someone who knew how to count small mercies and told Chioma about a boy who learned patience by planting seeds and waiting. The story fit the gardener she remembered.
The gardener's name.
Recognition pressed at her as if the past were a small hand tapping her shoulder. Chioma followed him to the low ponds because she could not let the thread of memory unspool without knowing its end. She crouched in reeds and heard him speak the gardener's name softly, and her throat tightened with an understanding she had not asked for. The knowledge tugged at her with both hope and fear. Should she call it out and shatter carefully held things? Or let the past remain a private thread? Her feet stayed planted, the earth holding her patience. Obina worked quietly to open the ledger. He visited Namdi, the old accountant, whose house smelled of ink and dust. Chioma shadowed him like a steady, small force. When Obina spread papers across Namdi's table, the man's face went white. The ledgers showed donations meant for the school had been funneled into the Obi account. Ikechukwa's script appeared like a trembling witness. Namdi slid a faint scrap of paper across the wood. A name ghosted in pale ink linked the Obi's tidy fortunes to a person many had assumed beyond reproach. Chioma's heart drummed in her ears as if the whole place had become a living thing that would not lie still. Each revelation felt like a small blade cutting through the polite skin of the settlement. Chioma found Ikechukwu in the shed behind his mother's hut, hands wrapped around a cheap jar, small smoke pluming into the cold. He looked younger than she had imagined, worry hollowing his face. He confessed in tiny shards. He had altered ledgers, moved cash, signed where forced, because Amaka had held his mother's deed like a knife above his head. Fear had pushed his hand. Love for his family had closed his courage. He pressed a threatening note into Chioma's palm, Amaka's handwriting and a phrase, "Do not show your face in the market tomorrow," signed with a mark that looked like dried blood. "What should I do?" he asked in a voice too small for the burden. Chioma wrapped a steady hand around his and said, "We will stand with truth."
But the mark, it looks like blood.
The festival at Town Hall burst the settlement open with music, lanterns, sweetbreads, and children's laughter.
Cash, what's
People painted small boats and set them afloat in overflowing gutters and shallow channels. Obina arrived on his BMW SUV and the crowd parted with curiosity. Some clapped with hope, others muttered, suspicious of a stranger bearing cash. Amaka watched from the Obi steps, hands clenched like she held a fragile coin. Chioma stood close to Obina as if by standing steady she might keep the world upright. Then a lantern fell. Flame found cloth and the night erupted into panic. Men formed a line with buckets, passing water in a fevered chain. Someone in the Obi locked the storeroom and refused to open it. The smoke tasted like iron and fear. The Obi's east wing sang with sudden heat and wooden beams began to fall. They fought the fire until arms ached and lungs filled with smoke. Water passed hand to hand like ritual. The sky turned the color of ash. When the flames died, a scorched fragment of ledger fell into Chioma's hands. Her fingers blistered as she read blackened words. The paper spoke plain. Donations shifted to the Obi account. A gift meant for the school had been eaten by burning and ink. Amaka's face folded into something bitter and small. In the ruin, Chioma found a scrap of a lullaby, the same tune Afani had once hummed to children tucking into naps. The song stitched present to a time before rumor thinned the air. Ikechukwu was gone and Chioma wondered whether the blaze had been accident or cloak for theft. In the loss, the quiet things Afani had offered, lessons, patience, small generosity, loomed larger than ever. Obina gathered the ledgers and read them beneath the town hall steps. He showed pages and asked straightforward questions. Chief Okoye, the mayor, stumbled under the heat of revelation. He spoke of protecting the settlement in hard times. His voice sounded like torn cloth. Accusations rushed like wind and faces that had once bent for the Obi stepped back. Chioma pressed through the crowd and found a bloody handprint pressed to the gardener's old shed. The mark glistened with guilt. Anger rose but sorrow sat beneath it. This community had been splintered by need and fear for too long. Some wanted punishment, some wanted to repair. The cross-current of choices made Chioma feel small. She steadied her breath and looked for Ikechukwu, because truth needed not only naming but mending. They found Ikechukwu at the reed marsh, crumpled and pale from the night's work and the weight of his conscience. He told the truth in jagged pieces. Amaka had held his mother's deed like a weapon and forced him to sign. Fear had pushed his hand. He revealed a darker plan. At dawn, Amaka would sign to sell the common lowlands and the irrigation beds that fed many fields. If the contract passed, the people would lose wells and grazing strips to a single roof. Chioma's insides turned to stone. Obina kept his face calm and hard, the kind of steady that steadied others. Ikechukwu begged forgiveness with eyes like small pools. They promised then to stop the signing because livelihoods cannot be traded for false comfort. At dawn they crowded the obi where a notary's ink block sat like a small altar. Obina stepped forward and read aloud what the ledgers had hidden. Partial proof of misuse, names like a dry list cutting the air. Amaka's face was pale but stubborn. She reached for the pen and signed anyway. The notary declared he could not cancel the contract without the owner's consent. Ink and law made the moment solid. The crowd felt betrayal like dust on the tongue. Chioma stood with mud under her boots and the memory of Ifani's patient hands in her mind. The sale hung over them like a hard thing. They would have to find repair inside the law and within themselves. Storms broke unexpectedly. Rain hammered like hammered glass and the lowlands filled. Waters ate at exposed edges and dragged at stubborn fences. Villagers who had once defended the obi watched their own crops wash away and felt the sting of having been wrong. Amaka declared misfortune. Obina spoke of responsibility and restoration. People waded into cold water, stacked sandbags and hauled possessions from low houses. The flood made choices urgent, but it also cleared a way for people to see which hands were ready to mend. Shared loss drew neighbors together, and the settlement began to test what repair could be. Under pressure, confessions started, not because of spectacle but because Obina treated everyone with steady fairness and asked them, gently and publicly, to answer for what had been taken. Chief Okoye admitted to hiding ledgers and using stability as excuse. When Amaka refused to speak, tempers rose. The burned fragments and Ikechukwu's fear cut through pretense. People faced the truth and had to choose how to mend. Some wanted retribution, others wanted to build again. The settlement's path would depend on whether they chose walls or bridges. Amaka broke at last. She confessed a secret rooted in grief. Years ago, after losing her own child, she had quietly taken a foundling from a poor midwife to secure her line and to ease her loneliness. She raised that child as heir, unaware of the child's true origin. Her actions had been done out of a strange, desperate love, but the result was theft and deception. The community split. Some called for banishment, others pleaded mercy. Obina urged repair, public confession, restitution, and daily work to restore trust. His voice refused to let shame be only punishment, it demanded mending. The heir, shocked and bewildered, slipped away to the reeds and found Obina. The young person asked who they truly were. Obina showed ledger fragments and letters found among the obi's ruined things and asked for honesty. The heir renounced a false title, offered to return lands to the people, and pledged to stand with truth. The crowd exhaled as if a long-held breath left their chests. Anger surged. Some demanded exile. Obina moved with calm that cut through the clamor. He said he could have seized the obi and exiled Amaka, but he refused to become the sort of cruelty they had served out to people. He proposed penance instead, public confession, full restitution of the missing donations, and that Amaka tend the obi's palace garden and share the harvest with the people for 10 years. The penalty was daily service, long work and visible repair rather than private vengeance. The idea of mercy and work together held the crowd in an uneasy hush. Chief Okoye stepped forward then, the years of office heavy in his shoulders. The crowd quieted as he climbed the town hall steps and faced the faces he had governed. His voice, once used for decrees and calming ceremonies, now trembled with a different weight. "I have led you poorly," he began, and the admission landed like a stone. He did not shield himself in excuses. He told them plainly that he had suppressed records to keep an illusion of stability, that he had turned descriptions of debt and gift into smudged lines that favored a few, and that he accepted responsibility. Then he outlined the restitution plan in precise detail. First, an immediate public inventory of all obi accounts within 7 days, led by Namdi and audited by a committee of 5 chosen openly: Obina, Chioma, Adiz, Ifani and an elder selected by lot. Second, an emergency school fund would be created that afternoon. All misallocated sums identified in the inventory would be transferred into that fund within 60 days. Payments into the fund would be guaranteed by Okoye and Amaka together. Half from Okoye's personal savings and a structured repayment schedule from Amaka's restored income, so the school would receive full restitution within 3 years. Third, the contract to sell the common lowlands would be declared void and the land titles returned to communal management. A commons committee, elected by the people, would manage irrigation and grazing rights. Fourth, an immediate seed and tool distribution would be organized to help smallholders replant this season. funded by a temporary levy on the Obi's market stall fees. The levy would be transparent and overseen by the new committee. Chief Okoye continued. He would open his private accounts to audit, resign his privileged positions on any boards connected to the Obi, and submit to monthly public meetings at the town hall where ledgers would be read aloud and the committee would report progress. Any failure to meet timelines would bring community penalties, public work quotas and matched contributions by those in power. When he finished he knelt, not in theatrics but in a small, honest act. I have been the keeper of our books and the keeper of our secrets, he said. I failed you. I will spend what it takes to mend this. If you wish me gone, ask and I will step down. If you will have me stay to repay and to rebuild, hold me to this plan. The crowd's silence stretched, then broke into a mixture of cries and murmurs. Some demanded resignation. Others, seeing the detailed plan and the openness of his words, nodded slowly. The publicness of the apology and the clarity of restitution made it harder to hide behind outrage alone. It set into motion the work Obinna had asked for. Repair anchored in obligation and oversight. Letters found in a sealed chest and a child's tiny shoe stitched with a braid matched tokens worn by some in the crowd. Evidence tied the foundling's origin to the Reed folk and proved Amaka's grief and her secret love. The community was forced to hold both harm and tenderness together. Not all judgments were simple. Obinna insisted on restitution and open coffers. Chief Okoye would repay what had been hidden, Amaka would confess and the commons would be restored. Ikechukwu, raw with remorse, offered hands for rebuilding, carrying the weight of his mistake in calloused palms. Work began in earnest. Villagers repaired low walls, rebuilt classroom benches and planted seed rows in cooler soil. Amaka knelt with muddy hands among the rose beds she had once ignored and learned to share yields at the market. People taught her how to read the new accounts. She entered each number into the public ledger with trembling fingers. Obinna used the cash he had been secretly given not for show but for repair. Paying skilled hands to fix roofs, buying materials for the school, ensuring families on the edge would not be left without seed. He never explained its origin. To others it was simply a gift from someone who had decided to set things right. Chioma's affection for Obinna grew from the steady kindness he showed and from the way his face at times mirrored the gardener's gentleness. She stood beside him in the market and at meetings, lending voice and careful hands to reknit civic life. Their relationship was patient and deliberate, small acts of care becoming the mortar for a larger trust. Their affection grew quietly, stitched between labor and laughter. Obinna's steady regard, his refusal to shout, his habit of apologizing when he bumped into someone, became a comfort to Chioma. She found herself saving the best baskets for him to carry, and he began leaving little ceramic bowls at her stall, bright with the glaze of careful mornings. When the town celebrated the first harvest after the repairs, Obinna stood among friends and family and asked Chioma to marry him. He did not offer grand words but steady promises, shared mornings, pots mended together, a home where forgiveness sat at the table. She answered with a laugh and a tear. Their marriage followed and was simple and full of communal labor. Neighbors brought kola and yams. Ikechukwu helped carry bundles he had once feared to touch. Amaka, now tending the Obi's palace, offered a garland. Many stood at the town hall as witnesses, and the settlement watched two people who had learned service and patience pledge themselves. When they wedded in the town hall, where once cruelty had felt unstoppable, the villagers came with soil on boots, laughter, and a kind of communal joy that felt like sunlight after rain. Their vows were simple, to continue tending the people and the land. Obinna and Chioma took on roles the town needed. Chioma organized trade cooperatives so small sellers would not be squeezed by one roof. She kept careful ledgers and taught vendors how to band together to set fair prices and rotate market space. Obinna taught young potters how to shape more than clay, how to shape reliable livelihoods. He continued to use the BMW SUV when markets were far or when fragile wares needed gentle transport. Sometimes he ferried elderly neighbors to the clinic, the SUV's back seats piled with baskets and pottery wrapped in cloth. His driving was unhurried and attentive, and the way he secured each box with twine and soft cloth made people feel their goods were safe in his care. Together with others, they formed a council rooted in service. Meetings were held under the town hall shade and decisions were made in sunlight. Names on ledger pages were matched by hands in the soil and sweat on brows. The Obi retained its roof, the commons remained communal, and the town hall turned into a space for honest talk and communal labor. Obinna and Chioma led by example. Obinna argued in council for transparent accounts. Chioma organized communal meals and taught the children Obinna songs. Together they ensured the Obi remained a roof over many heads, not a single owner's prestige. The Commons Committee they started managed wells and irrigation beds. It was run by a rotating body of neighbors. The old power softened under steady kindness. People learned that account books could be open and that repair could be daily work. The settlement's measures of worth shifted from title to who mended and tended. One season, when the harvest was too thin and an old neighbor, Neka, fell ill and needed urgent travel and medicine the village could not immediately cover, Obina faced a quiet choice. The community pooled what they could, but the cost to transport Neka to the city clinic and cover treatment still shorted the needed sum. Obina walked out to the dusty yard where the BMW SUV sat, its roof laden once with market crates, its back seats bearing the imprint of countless fragile loads. He ran a palm along the dented hood and thought of all the small journeys it had made, ferrying produce, carrying pots safely, driving elders to distant clinics. The car had been a symbol of steady care, not pride. That afternoon he sold the SUV to a trader passing through, taking the cash and handing it straight into Neka's care. He did not hold a parade. He drove her the last mile in a neighbor's cart, sat with her while the medicine was bought, and returned with only a soft smile and a clay bowl he had made as a keepsake for the buyer. The settlement watched him do this and felt something shift. Obina's SUV had been a humble sign of service. By selling it he turned that symbol into direct help for a neighbor. The act became a lesson. Humility can be public and quiet, and the things we own can be put to work for the living. Years later, when children who had once crouched in mud played beneath new trees, the town told a simpler story. A gardener who returned, a woman who forgave, two couples who married and helped rebuild, and a community that learned to measure worth by who tended the earth and who mended what they had broken. Only Obina and the woman at the reed edge knew the quiet promise that had put cash into his hands. It changed him but did not change how he met another person. With patience, with laughter, and with hands ready to work. The town hall no longer loomed like a stern face, it opened like a doorway. The Obi's gate kept its roof but no longer the claim to everything. Obina and Chioma sat at council with neighbors and argued for transparent ledgers, commons committees, and daily public work when harm required mending. They planted groves where children could climb, built benches where elders could sit and tell the old songs, and hung a sign by the market, "Worth is tending, not taking." In private, when dusk slid like a shawl over the settlement, Obina and Chioma would sit by the roses in the garden and speak softly of the obligations that come with second chances. They walked home by lamplight, hands clasped. The SUV no longer parked under the thorn tree, its absence a quiet echo of the choice he had made. Those who had once spat and sneered learned to kneel and help. Those who had taken learned to return. The work of rebuilding had become the settlement's daily prayer. And when a small child dropped a lantern near the market and flame threatened to take what they had rebuilt, the town moved together, buckets passing, hands joining and voices steady, because they had learned that truth asked for repair, and that repair required both justice and mercy. The town endured not through one person's wealth, but through many hands willing to do the slow work of being kind.
Like,
Please subscribe,
share,
like,
and
share to
comment.
get our next story.